make welcome next to our next speaker, and this is all the way over here, so come along. Lisa, would you like to join us?
Hello. Clearly, I got the memo about the uniform, so that was a stroke of luck. Thank you. So I can reassure you that I was only 10 minutes. Please don't be frightened. And I'm going to do a very, very quick whistle-stop tour of GDPR. So I'm not going to go into the details. So, but I also wanted to reassure you that I am also, whilst maybe being a bit of a data geek, I am also human. And though possibly only as human as a crazy dog lady can be. But whilst I do data in the week, you'll probably find me in a field with my dog at the weekend. So I am normal. So very few, I'm just, as I say, just going to quickly scoot through some topics at a fairly high level, but obviously I'm around for the day if you've got any more detailed questions. So just a few top lines. Oh, sorry. There, that was me told. So just a few very top-line thoughts to have a think about as I'm going through some other, the rest of the topics. So just some things that some people don't always appreciate or understand about GDPR. The first one, I think, is an interesting one, is that there are actually two laws that impact data protection. Now, pretty much everybody's heard about GDPR. We all know it's about protecting people's data. But there is a secondary law, which is equally as significant, called PECA, for whatever reason, Privacy and Electronic Communication Regulation. Now, that relates to all of your information that's used within the online communications space. So that's your email, that's SMS, that's a lot of things that you're probably using. And so there is a secondary law which relates to that. Another thing, do you need a DPO in your organization? Again, something else people aren't sure of. There is a very useful online at the ICO little quick survey that you can run that will tell you that. But fundamentally, it's only if you do very large-scale processing or you're a public authority. So you can just have somebody in the organization who has an awareness of it. So it doesn't have to be a separate role. That's something to consider. Are you a data controller or a data processor? Again, that impacts what you can and can't do with your data. If you're collecting, and I imagine most of you are collecting your own customer data for your own use, then you are a data controller. And as such, you may need to register with the ICO, but I shall come on to that later. And the last point here is the fines. Now, we all know the horror stories of the fines, but there are actually two types of fines. The top one, whether there's data misuse, is the higher one. And the second one is whether or not you are actually able to demonstrate that you are adhering to the rules and the principles. Some people don't think about that one. They worry about breach. But the second one is equally as important. If the ICO kind of catch you not doing it properly, they will fine you. So I'm going to start with the kind of important topic, really, around consent. Now, I've split this into existing customers and prospects because obviously both important. And one point to note on here around existing customers, everybody thinks about consent. Everybody worries about, am I allowed to use my customer data? How can I use my customer data? What's it consented for? Now, in actual fact, you are able to communicate with your existing customers if they have bought from you. Now, this is the actual statement from the ICO website around that point. And this is one of the PECA rules. So you can, as long as if they are an existing customer and they know your brand, then it's not unreasonable they would expect to hear from you. So that's commonly known as a soft opt-in. But that's just to clarify that point, because that's often an area that people get confused about. Other than that, for best practice, we would recommend consent, but as you see from soft opt-in, it's not always necessary, but it's a good way to go forward. The note on that point there, and you must offer us to unsubscribe pretty much at all times, is that if you are communicating with your customers on anything to do with the service or offerings you're providing, you have a right. You don't need consent. So those are the very clear distinctions around when you can communicate. If you are trying to build your prospects and trying to build a prospect database, then you do need opt-in consent. And just lastly, around other stuff, just a couple of thoughts really. Do recommend, it's best practice to get opt-in. It's just safer that way. Nobody can ever kind of question why you are then communicating to them, and it helps you later on when we come to data subject rights. There are six legal bases for processing, but the three that matter from a marketing perspective are consent, that you have a right to speak to them, and that it is for service, or that they have a legitimate interest, you have a legitimate reason to. I won't go into the detail there because it can get a bit complicated, but some of the other reasons are around whether you're a public authority or they're for medical reasons, and areas that probably are less relevant to your organisations. Okay, so a couple of slides here, just a little bit of detail, just to give you an oversight of the GDPR. These are the GDPR principles. In summary, what they mean is that when you are collecting data, you need to have clarity around why you're collecting it and what you're going to use the data for. Essentially, you should only be collecting data that you are very clear about why you're collecting, what you're going to collect it for, what you're going to do with it, how long you're going to keep it, and that you are going to look after it. It's all about looking after a consumer's data. And the bottom line, accountability, that you can justify all of the above. If you are keeping data for 6 months, 12 months, 3 years, 8 years, you have to be able to justify it. And following on from that, there is and this relates back to that secondary fine. The secondary fine is around these areas. And this plays into the data subjects rights. So these are the data subjects rights. So every person that you hold data on, because GDPR relates to individuals' data. It doesn't relate to data that doesn't belong to an actual individual, personally identifiable information, as it's called within the GDPR. These are the things that are their rights. So essentially, they have a right to access of their data. They have a right to what you do with it. They have a right to stop you using it. And they have a right to understanding what you're doing with it. So basically, you can't just hold any old data that you want to and do what you like with it. They will have a right to all of that information. So that, in summary, of course there is a lot more detail, but that in summary is the GDPR. That is the data protection. So just to finish, a couple of thoughts, because as I say, it was very much a whistle-stop tour of GDPR, is what are the things that you should think about doing now? Firstly, audit. Do you, relating to all those previous points, are you currently compliant? Now, I sort of say this because, one of the things is a data team, we're a data services agency, we do look after clients' GDPR and their data, as well as work with their data for them, is that it's surprising how many organizations get sort of caught up in the detail and aren't compliant for no other reason that they maybe don't appreciate what they need to do. And a lot of it, again, can be around that secondary fine area about can they demonstrate compliance. It's not always about being compliant, it's being able to demonstrate compliance. So a couple of things, should you register at the ICO? As I say, there's a really nice little survey thing online at the ICO, which will tell you that. It's only 35 quid, I would, if you're a data controller. Another important thing is that GDPR, data protection, should have a voice at a very senior level. There is an expectation that it has a voice at board level. So does it in your organisation, is the question. The fourth point there, regular staff training. It's maybe not okay that there's only 1 or 2 people in the business that understand all of that stuff. It is actually a mandatory requirement that all staff, especially those staff who work with data, do have some level of basic training. There's all sorts of online training options, so I would recommend having a look at one of those. And finally, documentation, it's dull, but that is the accountability piece. There are a number of mandatory documents that are required within to demonstrate accountability. And this is the piece where you need to, as I always say, if you get the knock on the door from the ICO saying, are you looking after your data properly, can you hand them a file that says, yeah, look at all these processes and look at all this stuff that we do, and I can show you that I know where all the data is in the business, what we did with it, and why we did what we did with it. That is a mandatory piece, so that's, whoever is responsible for GDPR in your organisation, it's worth to check that that's in place. And that's me with only 3 seconds to go. Check me out.
That was a whistle-stop tour, and very impressive. Of all the things I thought I was going to learn about today, Pekka rules was not one of them, if I'm entirely honest with you. Feels like a lesson I should have learned maybe 30 years ago. Thank you.